So yeah, so planning books, it's a bit of an interesting one. Because there seems to be a sort of accepted idea that people tend to fall into one of two camps. The pantser, who writes from the seat of their pants and has no real idea and just forges ahead and sees what happens. And then there's the plotter, who will spend any amount of time before they actually start writing, planning out their book. And it's an interesting one because I think I've changed. Or maybe it's more that each book requires a slightly different approach. I think for me, because one of my favourite parts of the process is actually the putting of the words down, of choosing the best words, the actual writing and constructing the sentences. I think I've always loved hearing people talk about how they just kind of get the glimmer of an idea, or they get a mental image or a character, and then they just start writing and see what happens. Because for a long time I was very kind of anxious to get to the point where I was putting words on the page. But I think actually I'm not totally convinced that those people who say that really mean it. And secondly, I think perhaps because of the kinds of books that I write, which are quite heavily plotted and there are twists and turns and reveals, that doesn't really work for me. So there has to be an element of planning. Weirdly, Before I Go to Sleep was the least planned book of the three that four now really, that I've written, pretty much. And that did just start with the mental image of a woman looking in a mirror and being shocked to find that she was much older than she was expecting. And but even then I didn't start writing until I knew the end. I did know the twist, rather. But then I sort of didn't really know how I was going to get from A to Z. I just sort of started writing, and because of that I did find myself writing myself into a lot of cul-de-sacs, which I had to then reverse out of. Second Life was much more plotted, although I still did leave a lot of room to write around my plan, I suppose. And Final Cut was quite heavily plotted, but even that has been less than the new one. I think I'm becoming more of a plotter, less of a pantser with each book. And partly that's because I've actually started to really enjoy the planning process. So when I sit down to plan a book, I've got to have a fairly good idea of what the book is, what it's about, before I can do this. But once I've got that I feel committed to a project, and I feel like I've got characters and I've got a rough idea of who they are and what's going to happen to them, I'll then start working quite a lot on actually fleshing out those characters. But I always know when I've got a character that is ready to go into the book, when I feel rather than making stuff up about them, I'm discovering stuff about them. They feel real. They feel as though they exist. If someone was to ask me, I don't know, how did they vote in the last election? I feel like I'm working out how that real person would have voted, and rather than inventing something. And that's when I know that kind of character is standing on their own 2 feet in a way. And I then go through quite a long process of really trying to work out what's missing from their life. I think all fiction really, on some level, is about desire. And that goes for the antagonist as well. And in some ways I think that's as important, because for me, it's that cliche about everyone being the hero of their own story. And I think the antagonist, the baddie, also has to feel that they're not just doing it for the sake of it. They're just kind of the psycho. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the psycho with a ski mask on, who's running around killing people because they feel like it. I think for me there has to be some more depth. And strangely, I've got quite a lot of sympathy. One of the characters I've written that I've got the most sympathy for is the Mike character in Before I Go to Sleep. I don't have that much because he did some bad things, obviously, but I spent quite a lot of time with him actually. I know exactly what his background is and why he became that person, why he became someone capable of doing that. And I think I have to do that to write. I think even the bad guys you have to write with some sympathy. So when I really feel like I understand the character and know what they want and where they're coming from and the things that they're prepared to do to get this thing, then I feel like I can start, still not writing, but then I feel like I can start plotting out. And that often will, for me, will start with the inciting incident, so the thing that kind of upsets their equilibrium at the beginning of the book. And I think to work out what the inciting incident should be, it can often be really helpful to ask yourself, what question will the reader want answered at the end? At the end of Psycho, the film, the audience want to know, well, who killed the woman in the shower, whose name I've forgotten. And that instantly tells you that the inciting incident has to be the death of the woman in the shower. So by asking yourself what question the audience is asking themselves through the book, you can often then work back and say, well, okay, when does that question first arise? What incident happens at the beginning or near the beginning of the book that first causes that question to arise in the reader's mind? And that can really key you into what the inciting incident has to be. You know, once I've got my characters, the arc of the plot, I know the end or the twist always, and I've got my inciting incident, then I can start to fill in some of the gaps around. But it's only by going over and over again that I will gradually build up the plot to the point that I then have, I don't know, an idea of maybe 40 scenes that are going to be in the book. And then I can begin to write. Now, as I write, I will then deviate from my plan slightly, but I've learned through bitter experience not to deviate too much. Often another scene will kind of interject itself. So there'll be a scene 36 and a scene 37, and suddenly a 36 and a half will turn up. Other times I'll realise that a scene that I had planned doesn't really work, doesn't achieve what I wanted it to achieve, or actually becomes unnecessary. And then I will, if I'm lucky, I won't write that. If I'm less lucky, I'll write it and then realise it was unnecessary. But it's all good stuff. I think every scene you write, even if it doesn't end up in the book, teaches you more about the story, more about the characters, more about the world that you're creating. So, yeah. So that's how I plan the book. But again, that's just how I'm planning or planned the book I'm writing now. The next book, who knows? That's one thing I'm learning as I get further into my career, I suppose, is to keep questioning the process, not to be too rigidly attached to a particular way of doing it, because it does seem like every book requires something slightly different from me. So it's important to keep an open mind. So yeah, so I hope that's interesting. Take care and look after yourself.